All right, so you want to share your screen?
Yes, I will. I will share my screen. Give me a second.
Okay.
Just for disclosure, my kid is watching some videos next door, so he might come in a couple of times and I might have to step away for just a quick minute to put another video on for him. We'll see how that goes.
All right, thanks for
My
the
husband's
warning.
still recovering from his surgery and he's not feeling 100%, so I'm double timing here. Let me see.
Oh, yeah, double.
Or whatever the term is. Let me go on the right PowerPoint. 1 second. Okay. So before we start with my slides, I have some thoughts on abstracts, but what are your questions about abstracts? Any questions, anything that when you're writing your abstract, when do you usually write the abstract? What do you struggle with? Any feedback, any thoughts, any comments on that?
The number of words that's has.
I had a feeling this would come up. It's a very restricted space, yes. How to fit it in all like 250, 300 words, right?
Sometimes it ends up, I could not reduce any other word. And I must remove 15 words. This is my big problem, usually.
Yeah, it is a big problem. And some journals are generous with their space for abstracts and some are not. Yeah. Okay. What else? Everybody share their concern?
Yeah, it's the first thing that the readers people read, so it's quite challenging to make it as catchy as possible.
Well, yeah, sometimes based on the abstract will determine whether the reader will actually read the article itself, right? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Sometimes
right.
the representing thing for your paper, if you're going to a conference or will it be a poster or will it be an oral presentation? This is a
Yeah. So there's two types of abstracts, right? There's the abstract we write that's based on our manuscript. And then there's the abstract we have to write sometimes about work we're in the middle of doing or we want to do for a conference or something like that, or we have even done. And I find that the abstracts for conferences, it depends on the conferences, sometimes give you a little bit more space than the journal abstracts, but that can also vary, right? There's a lot of variation in this genre abstract across the board and what it's supposed to do. But I think a restriction in space is common no matter how much words you get, how many words you get. It's always not enough. Anything else? So, there's one way to look at it is like, oh my God, I don't have enough space to say what I want. On the other hand, it's also, to try to put a positive spin on it, that's sort of what I try at times, is to really think about like, what's the most important nuggets of information that my readers need to kind of get an idea of what my study is about. And that can be very tricky because we're like, everything's important. But actually, it is not, it is, but not for the abstract. So it's really, the abstract is an art in being concise. And full disclosure, it is not something that comes very natural to me. So I have to, when I work on abstracts, I have to crunch a lot. And so I'll have two PowerPoints here for abstracts. One is I just want to go over some general formatting suggestions or some types of abstracts that are out there and look at some examples. And then I have another slide deck that I did with a group of postdoctoral scholars in our School of Pharmacy and Medicine a while ago. And they were struggling with the same issues you had around trying to condense the abstract. And I have some tips for that as well. So we can review those. And then I have a slide we can talk on titles a little bit, because titles is also, there is a certain rhythm to creating a title. that also can be challenging, right? Because you also have a limited amount of words. You don't want to have a 40-word title. Nobody will publish that, or very rarely. So the concerns for abstracts and titles are somewhat similar. So let's get started and ask a question anytime. I'll make some room in there as well, but right, so our abstracts, of course, provide an overview of the article, and what they really do is they also have 4 parts to them, just like introduction, methods, results, discussion. So my suggestion is always to start when you write your abstract, try to just write 1 sentence about each section. And you might need more sentences, particularly for your results, most likely, and maybe your discussion section, but mostly for your results, you might need 2 sentences there. But starting off with 1 sentence, try to put it in 1 sentence that's not, 100 words long, but like 30 or 20 to 30 words. And that's a good start, because if you can distill information from each of your 4 sections into like 1 sentence, the most important information, then you have a good start to build from, and you're already not writing, a novel, okay? So because it really is, the key elements of an abstract are highlights from each section. So maybe 1 to 2 sentences you'll end up ultimately per section. And that will get you to, my 100 words is very, very limited. I don't see those too much, but 250 to 300, does anybody see anything else? Is that pretty standard, you would say?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what my gathering is. I have seen some journals, and some of them are qualitative social science journals or interdisciplinary journals with humanities, which is where my background, where we get up to 400 or 500 words for an abstract. But that's because often the work that we publish in the humanities in particular isn't structured in the introduction, methods, results, discussion format. So we get a little bit more space. But most scientific journals, even for qualitative and quantitative work, tend to have short abstracts. And it is the most read part of the article, so pressure, right? So there's 2 types of abstracts. So let me talk about the style on the bottom here first, because you'll probably mostly see the descriptive one. The informative, actually, no, that's not right. Give me a second. You'll see mostly the informative one. The descriptive one is usually reserved for studies that don't follow the IMRAD, which is the genre I tend to write abstracts in when I don't do any empirical research. If I'm writing an historical piece or an analysis of literature or something like that, right, which I've done in the past. And then we have 2 formats. There's the simple style and the structured, simple or conventional style. And is I should say format here. Sorry about that. That's a typo. Format and the structured format. And what these are, I talk about in a second. You'll recognize them immediately. There we go. Actually, hold on. Let me erase those drawings. All right. Navigating the stuff here is a little tricky. There we go. So, and again, just before we go into those differentiations, common elements are, background. So usually what I see a lot, it's a real formula, is 1 sentence for the background, like ovarian cancer, something, something, something. Hypothesis, our study examined, or our study's aims were blah, 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 blah. We use this and this, and then we use this and this. Our main finding is, or our data shows blah, 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 blah. And you might even have sort of something from implication or takeaway message. I sometimes find that many abstracts sort of combine conclusion, implication, or even stop right here with the key findings, right? And maybe don't say too much about like future studies should show, because that's something that then readers can go to in the discussion section if they really want to find out more, right? So the idea is really these, this is usually 1 sentence, this is usually 1, maybe 2. I find the methods is the longest. You sometimes see 2 to 3 sentences, as well as the results. And by sentences, I mean shorter ones, like up to 20 words, right? So we're not talking 40-word Isabelle sentences. So that's a formula I think that works really well. I think the background is something that you really want to train yourself to condense into one sentence, and then one sentence for your aims. Because honestly, the background section, people want to know more about the context. That's what the introduction section is for. I'd be like, oh, this sounds interesting. Let me read the article, right? But you want to give your reader a frame. That's really just a framework sentence, like a big topic sentence for what the context of the work is. So let's take a look at that. Hold on. So I should put the slide earlier, mix them up. So let me see. Actually, the difference between, I'm going to go out of this PowerPoint for a second. I'm going to show you some examples here. Let me make this bigger. This was from the article yesterday that we looked at with the ovarian cancer. So this is what we call a simple abstract. Not that it's simple because it's hard to write, so it's not the implication, but it's just like one paragraph, right? And you'll see, let me make this a little smaller so you can all see it. Hold on. Okay, this is not helping. Give me a moment. I got to find the right. Here, can you all see this well? The abstract here? Trying to make it. I don't have too many options here. Let me see. Yeah, the other option is this one, and I think it cuts it off. Yeah, I gotta go one smaller. So the 200%. So here's the abstract. So it's just, so let's look at the sentences for these. It's easy to see on my PowerPoint. Tumors often display mechanisms to avoid or suppress immune recognition. One such mechanism is the shedding of yada, yada, yada. So here we have the background, right? 1 to 2 sentences. And look how short these sentences are, especially the first one. I like it. Then comes the aims. So this is background. I'm going to change the color. The yellow is a little hard to see. Background. Then we have here the study aims. In this study, and it's actually not even the aims, it's already like getting into the methods, right? In this study, we identify GD3, which was isolated, purified, yada, yada, a molecular, this is the methods part here. Actually, no, hold on. I'll clear all the drawings. So here again, background. Sorry for my crazy. Here is the methods. And then it's already displayed a high affinity that already gets into the results. Here are our major results. You see how that's the biggest part of this paragraph, of this abstract. Results, background intro, right? And here is indicate sort of what it means, right? The discussion section. So you have the longest part is the results section, 1, 2, 3. And you could almost say this part here might already be part discussion section. It's already providing some context what the result means. So often these kind of blend into each other. But you know, you basically, and this is the hardest selection part I find, because you really have to, you want to report on your main finding. So what's the main finding you have that answers your research question or your relates to your aims? And then there's all these other important findings that relate to it, but those you leave for the discussion section. You can't put them all in. So I think the trouble with abstract writing is that we tend to want to put everything in the article in the abstract, and that's not the point of an abstract. It's kind of, you know, it's really like if you're, you know, the analogy that I was given early on is when you're picking up a novel you want to read, like I love reading novels, there's a short synopsis, right? And think about when you have to summarize, and I don't know if you had to do this in your undergraduate student career, but I certainly have seen a lot of folks have to do that. We call this genre annotated bibliography, which is basically a paragraph on articles in a related field that you're reviewing to show off that you understand what the field is about, right? So it's an early genre in the process of learning how to do research writing. And what you have to do there is to summarize the article, which is kind of like an abstract. That's really what you're doing here. It's sometimes easier to do that for somebody else's article than for your own. but it's also you as the authors of your work, you know what the most important things are. You just need to be comfortable leaving behind things that don't fit in the abstract, right? And so I think that's the challenge, right? Staying within the word limits. And I find that one strategy to make sure that your abstracts are short is to make sure your sentences aren't too long. Because once you do that, you might have to cut either sentence up or take something out. So they shouldn't be longer than really, I don't know, 25 words should be the longest you should go for in an abstract, because it's a short genre already. Nobody wants to read long sentences in there. And the other trick that I find has helped folks to reduce the number of words is to really emphasize active language as much as possible. So don't use passive in there. And I'll show some examples for that in a second. But here is sort of the simple abstract where each sentence kind of relates to one part of the study, right? Make sense? I'm going to clear the drawings. Okay, I'm going to show you.
Yes.
Go ahead. Any questions? No, we're good? All right. Oopsie, let me get out of this. So here is, and I'm going to enlarge this again. Hang here with me. Now it's giving me more options. Aha. So here is what we call, maybe reduce this, it gets bigger. Hello. This is what we call a structured abstract, right? So you actually have headings for each section. I find these abstracts personally really helpful because then I know, what each section means. They also tend to be a little longer than the simple abstract format, right? So because you often get a little bit more space for these. This is from the BMC, what journal is this? BMC Infectious Diseases. So BMC, I've noticed, has a lot of, so I actually see a lot of structured abstracts more recently in more recent publications. So my feeling is that a lot of journals are moving towards structured abstracts because it does help compartmentalize the information. So you have backgrounds, methods, results, conclusions, which is the discussion section. And again, you see in this here, the method section is pretty long, the longest. The background is also fairly lengthy. And so it really kind of captures, what's the general blood. This is about, let me see what the title is, Impact of Delayed Processing of Positive Blood Cultures on Organism Detection, a Prospective Multi-Center Study. So about blood cultures, one solution is, however, right? And so, so it says here, however, the impact of delay between the bottle flagging positive and subsequent subculture on the viability of the isolate has received little attention. In a way, what would be great to have here what this study focuses on, but you can detect this is what the study focuses on, right? So there is that implication here. And then, the study evaluated. And so what I want to point out here is the active language. So everybody familiar with passive versus active, right? I kicked the ball was kicked by me. I kicked the ball as active because I'm doing actively something to another object, person, thing. Whereas passive is like the ball was kicked by me, right? So, and science writing is notorious for having a lot of passive voice. And journals are very adamant these days. Editors really encourage their authors to use a lot of passive. Now, in the methods results sections, I'm not so worried about that, but the intro and discussion section, right? That's where it's important to, just like with the paragraph structure and the old new contract, to really emphasize active voice as much as possible. And so this is a good example. So blood cultures remain the gold standards as active. In many locations is not possible as active. One solution is and then transport. The impact has received little attention. Here we have passive voice, right? So I'm gonna, and that's okay. It has received little attention by whom. It's not important that by the community, the research community. So it's what hasn't received attention is important. So that's why we have that in the subject. And then you have your methods part. The study evaluated active again, right? 90 spiked samples of were evaluated. So we have passive here, which is also okay. was investigated. Because you have the method section, the passive doesn't matter. All organisms were recoverable. Were recoverable. I guess it's active, but it has a passive tinge to it. Storage of positive bloods in the use help preserve is active again. Results have practical implications. So just one sentence for the results, really focusing on implications. That is medical research-driven research. So it's important to emphasize the implications. So you have 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 3 to 4 sentences of passive voice, but a lot more active. And I think that's one really good strategy to keep in mind as you're writing your abstracts, just like you would for your manuscript, to the background, conclusions, results, but as much as possible, emphasize active voice. Okay, so let's look at a few more examples in my drawings. Hold on, go back to the PowerPoint. Where is it? So I have a few other examples here. Let me see. You can take a look at them. If you have time, you can look at some more later. But I want to show you one example of a simple and informative abstract. Again, simple, informative, descriptive, informative are the two versions you'll see. Simple without headings, descriptive with headings. So here is one example. I think, Henry, this is your example from one of your studies. I apologize for not putting the citation in there. Don't report me to the plagiarism police. So you'll have here again, the first, it's always kind of in bold. The first recent studies from Western countries indicate significant levels of questionable research practices, but similar data from low and middle income countries are limited, right? One sentence, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. That's actually a good strategy for that first sentence for your abstract. The first part is, this is what we know, however, we don't know this. Our study addresses this, blah, blah, in this way. That's a great formula for an abstract, because right there you have background and you have the introduction section covered with a short sentence of the background and what your study aims to, which is exactly what the authors here did, because the next one is our aims were to assess the prevalence, blah, 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 blah. This article is on, forgot the exact title, I don't know if you remember, but it's on research misconduct in countries in the area we often call the Middle East over here in the West, which is, a name that's not always not very accurate. Anyways, so our aims are to assess. So you have two sentences. You're done with your introduction section. Here is a section what they did. We distributed questionnaire in these countries. Participants were asked to A and B, and we used this logistic regression statistics to analyze the data. Boom, you're done. Is the method section no longer in the article? Of course, but it gives. So when I read this, I'm like, oh, interesting. I wonder what kind of survey questionnaire, what survey they used. Then you go to the article, right? Because you're interested, but you get a gist of what's happening in the paper. And then you have, and I think this is probably the part that's always the hardest to summarize, the results section, data, blah, 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 blah. Let me see, business showed a high prevalence of this. So many reported the most common type of self-report misconduct was circumventing research ethics regulations. And so you highlight the most important pieces. The results section has a lot more detail. So what you don't do in the abstract is there's no comparison contrast with previous studies in your abstract. That is reserved for the section. I often find that writers want to be like, well, but I got to contextualize the results and give, in the discussion section, not in the abstract. This is just really your material. And you might have noticed that in none of the abstracts we looked at so far, you didn't see any citations. Very rarely do you cite something in the abstract, because if you use parenthetical citation, right, the names in parentheses, that takes away words. And even if you use AMA with the number symbol, that might be easier to do in the abstract, but it's not necessary because, again, the abstract is meant as a teaser. I don't know if you go to the movies, right, you see the trailer or teaser for the new action movie, Disney comedy, whatever. That's, the context for me, that's the movie, the trailers that I usually see, right, for the newest hot movie of the summer. And the abstract does the same thing. So there's not everything, of course, is included there. Of course, trailers don't often give the conclusion away of the movie. You will in your abstract, right? And then again, a section on the bottom here, a significant predictor of misconduct included this. Study misconduct represents a significant issue in several universities, demonstration, blah, blah, blah. Further studies are needed to confirm whether our results can be generalized to other universities. You know, the last sentence, if you were running out of words, you probably could cut the last sentence, but it's nice to include it if you can, right? Because it gives that sort of complete picture of your study. But the future kind of implications, if you're running out of space, that will be, and you really can't figure out how else to cut it down, that's the part that I would leave for the discussion section, right? Because you don't have, that doesn't have to always necessarily be in the abstract as clearly as what's the context, what's your research question, what did you do, and what were your main results, okay? Any questions, comments, thoughts on this?
We can move.
You good?
Yes.
Good. I'm trying to see, there's more examples of abstracts, which I'm going to skip over because I really want to go on the other PowerPoint, which I, of course, closed down. Why did I do this? Give me a second. There it is. We called it polishing people's abstract. And so there's some key editing principles that I like to, or, you know, editing, reviewing principles that I really like to emphasize with folks. Oh, sorry about that. Clicked on the wrong thing. There we go. And so avoid excessive nominalizations, focus on strong verbs, reduce sentence lengths, much active voice as possible, organized text. You're like, what does all that mean? Let me explain. So the excessive nominalization, so I'll explain to you what a nominalization is in a second. So nominalization is when we use a noun instead of a verb. So here, for example, the discovery of rather than to discover, the management of rather than manage, right? And so, and I put the word count here. And oh, before I do that, in a lot of scientific writing, we tend to use these nominalizations like we executed an analysis of the data. Well, you analyze the data. So we executed an analysis of versus we analyzed, you're saving 3 words. And that might seem very little at the time, but if you have few nominalizations in your abstract, those might be the 12 words you can cut, and you might need 20 more, but you're on your way there. You know what I mean? So every word you can reduce can be very meaningful. And so rather than saying like for the discovery of, for the management of, right, to discover, to manage. So you save 4 words if you were doing this edit. The way to look for nominalizations in your writing is to look for excessive uses of the preposition of, because it's usually like the analysis of, the execution of, something of, and that hides the action, right? Because if I'm saying, I'm involved in the execution of carrying out this, or in the execution of a research protocol, well, if you're involved in it, you're executing it. So the actual action that's happening is execute, not in being involved, right? So being involved in the execution of sounds very sort of academic-y and, you know, like very complex, but it really hides the action. We often call nominalizations zombie nouns or vampire nouns because they sort of suck the lifeblood out of the action that's happening. So again, for the discovery of, it's discover, like that's the action that's happening. And when you emphasize that, when you really, those are good to reduce in general in any writing you do, but particularly abstract, they can be very useful to cut words. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is, vampire nouns. So you have something conclude becomes conclusion, and nothing's wrong with the word conclusion when you need to use the noun, but when you say we came to the conclusion that, well, we concluded, right? And how often do you hear those words? We performed an analysis of, you analyzed, right? Or this article provides an explanation of why ovarian cancer is high among women of a certain age or whatever, right? Well, you explained, or like we executed an assessment of. I do this a lot. I always use the term assessment. I always, and I write a lot about writing assessment in my research, right? And sometimes I have to use the word assessment, but not when I'm describing that I'm doing assessing. then I should use the verb, like, you know, we assessed, rather than we designed an assessment of writing samples in it. Like, no, we assessed writing samples, rather than, and then I can say our assessment was designed based on a theoretical framework that blah, 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 right? Then I can use the noun for as a subject, but not to describe the action, because that gets the added benefit of looking for these sort of hidden actions and these nominalized nouns is that your text will really be enlivened. Is that a term? That sounds weird, but it will really it will get some life back. I went to a workshop once where somebody called this like providing CPR on your text. And you all know what CPR is, of course, right? So you're really kind of like bringing life back to your text. And the added benefit for abstract writing is you reduce words. So, and I can guarantee you, I know in my writing, I don't know, I teach about normalizations and how not evil they are, but how obstructive they can be all the time. And I still use them a lot. So you really have to revise, you know, write your first version of the abstract. That's what I like to do. I like to then look at sentence length, and then I look at normalizations, or at the same time. And that almost always puts me right to the word limit that I need to be. That's all I have to do, because I'm pretty good about active voice most of the time, but that's just because I've been doing this for a while, right? And in my field of training and history, we're much more encouraged to be storytellers and use active voice than often scientists in lab or medical settings are. So that has come easier to me than some other things. So nominalizations are helpful, and here are some common ones that we use a lot in some scientific writing. Discovery is discover, discussion, evaluation. Like, you know, we included a discussion of, well, we discussed that, right? So included discussion might be what you want to say, and it maybe sounds good to you, but here we are in the business of reducing words. So performing it, doing a discussion of becomes discuss. You know, it just has to become the verb. It gets shorter, and you'll get to your word count. So again, I'll send you those slides, and you can, it's a good way to start. Like, okay, where are these words in my writing, and can I change them to make it more active? So that's principle number one. Principle two, strong verbs with clear actors. So let me show you this example. This is from an example from a company called Compugen that approached a business writing consultant about developing a mission statement for their company. So it's a slightly different context than when you're writing an abstract, but it exemplifies how when we focus on the action that's taking place can really help. Reducing nominalization is one way to get there, but there's also other ways that we can look more clearly for active verbs. So what is happening? Who is doing what in this sentence? Where's the action? What is Compugen doing?
Therapeutic proteins, focusing on therapeutic proteins and monoclonal antibodies.
So they're a company that focuses on, right? Which really doesn't give us too much about, like, so exactly what do you do? Like, are they making something? They're producing something, right?
They are working in the field of immunology and oncology.
Yeah. Like, okay.
Yeah,
something about immune. Yeah.
In there.
Yeah. So this is a perfectly fine sentence, by the way. It's grammatically correct. It's actually well constructed. It's 33 words long, a little on the longer side, but not unusual for scientific writing. So in an article, you might be able to include something like this, right? Fine. Even though I think there's a better, there might be a better way to preface that. But when you're in an abstract, for example, if that's a sentence from an abstract, here is the revision that would be possible. And from you saved 20 words. So Compugen makes therapeutic products that boost the human immune system and fight cancer. Oncology, immunology is all in there, but it's really about straightforward language, right? Boost
Is
might
it okay to Is it okay to put, yeah, I didn't like the unmet in the first version. My question is it okay to put something with the negative like this, the unmet?
Oh,
I think
this
it's
unmet
like-
needs. You know, that's so again, we're talking here about abstract versus article. In the article, you might, so if that was big, would be, let's say you're writing about Compugen and what, you know, whatever, did a study on them, something like that. Then you probably would want to, in your article, you would say something about unmet needs. I would suggest breaking the sentence up because there's a lot to unpack there and you would add some more information. So it is, so you're asking about the negative connotation, that's fine, because if you're saying there's this company addresses important unmet needs in the field of immunology, well, I'm curious, like, well, what are these unmet needs? What are others not doing? So you would provide more information on that naturally, right? But again, we're talking about the abstract here. All this stuff, you don't need all of that in the abstract. What you need in the abstract is what is Compugen doing and making, which is they're making products, and what do these products do? They boost and they fight. Right?
Okay.
And again, this is an example. It's a little weird for abstract because it is not written for an abstract, but I think it illustrates that when we focus on the actual verbs, but what people or entities are doing, companies, cells, survey questions, participants, let's give them agency and then put what they're doing in active verbs. It can change the impact of your writing dramatically. Make sense? So again, when you're reading, when you get to a sentence in your abstract draft that's like 20 plus words long, you might be like, what's really going on here? Because again, remember, you don't have to put all the complexities of your argument in the abstract. You just want to get in there, you know, that your readers get an idea of what your study is about and in which context it has been conducted, what research gap it might fill, and then what you've done briefly and details later, right? And what your main results are. So it's about condensation, and in a way that's easy to do because you know what's most important, but it's also hard to do at the same time because you just spent, you know, a long time on getting this manuscript together, and everything's important. You already had to cut out things anyways, right? Because it's limited word counts for articles, so that it feels like if you have to cut some more, like you don't leave anything left. There's nothing left. But trust me, there is, because an abstract is not to give me an idea of the entire study. I mean, abstract is to give me a fairly accurate snapshot of what I can find out more about in the article. So it's like, you give away the most important finding, but you don't give away all the complexities of the context, of the background, of all the details of your methods, because that's what the article is for. So it's really like, you have to almost like put on a hat as a different person. I don't know if that, role play makes any sense to you, but you might want to imagine like, hey, I wrote this manuscript, and let's pretend I'm a student, let me go back in time. For me, this would be a long time, 20 some years when I was a, beginning grad student. And if I see this article, well, how would I summarize it in a short paragraph, right? And sometimes just putting that sort of schema, or that's kind of scheme in your head, that kind of idea in your head, can help divorce yourself a little bit from being the author of the text by summarizing it. Right. So if you had to summarize it, how would you wouldn't summarize everything, because your instructor would be like, I don't need the article. I know it. I want you to summarize it. That's what an abstract does. And again, this, the focus on what exactly is happening with active verbs can be extremely useful. Okay. I'll look at this later. Okay. Any questions about that?
That's okay.
Good. Let's look at the principle. We do sentence length, right? And this is my favorite. And again, I'm what's the right term to use here? I love complex sentences. I really do. That's, maybe it's the way I think, I don't know if it's the way I think, but I think maybe we think so fast compared to the way, even if you're a fast typer, you're never going to be as fast typing as you're thinking. And that creates for me these long, complex sentences with like at least 5 or 6 different subparts. where you start reading the sentence and you get to the middle of it, and by the end you have no idea what you just read. That's sort of how I like to draft my writing. So, and that's where we have to, working on sentence length can be another useful way to approach revising your abstract. So here is an example. Sometimes you don't get a difference in sentence length. In this case, you don't, but you certainly get a clearer writing, shorter sentences. So property cytotoxicity is partially mediated through trapping of property sites of DNA damage, with next generation properties such as yada, yada, yada being trappers. So I would suggest making a break here. These next generation properties are potent PARP trappers. So rather than being with the gerund, which I also love, right, the ing version of verbs, like adding another phrase at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, always using, doing, examining, with the ing at the end. I would suggest make it a separate sentence. Sometimes it saves you words, sometimes it keeps it the same word count, which is the case here. But at least you've done a little bit more to make your abstract a little bit more engaging and not so hard to read, because you have all these long sentences in there. So this one wasn't a good example for necessarily difference in word count, but just in general, trying to have your abstract have shorter rather than longer sentences, right? Because shorter sentences are easier for your readers to get through and really understand, because right, that's what you want. You want them to then go to the paper. And personally, I find a short sentence here and there in academic writing and scientific writing is really helpful because it gives readers a break. And then a longer sentence might make, it's going to be easier to kind of get back to that. As if every sentence is, 40 some plus words long. I don't know. I don't know if anybody of you ever read the German philosopher's work, Immanuel Kant. I've had the pleasure or displeasure, one could say, reading it in the original German, right? Because I did philosophy for a while in Germany as a subject in high school, actually, my last years, and then also early in college. I abandoned it pretty quickly because I was like, I can't read this stuff. The translation sometimes, I don't know if Kant is translated into Arabic, but it's translated into English for sure. And the English version of Kant's work is a little bit easier to understand because there's some, the sentences have changed, but they're still very long. And he's infamous for writing sentences sometimes that would go on for like pages. I think there's one part in one of his works where there's one sentence, lots of semicolons and dashes, that's about 3 pages long. So don't do that. That's a very bad example. And it's also philosopher, and I think it kind of, it's like all these interconnected thoughts, and it makes it extremely difficult to kind of like, what is he really saying? What's the point? And I think that's part of the philosophical discourse, right? That's their thing. But in scientific writing, not good, because you're not gonna win any fans to want to read your work. Principle 4, let's look at active voice, right? An active voice almost always saves you words when you switch from passive to active. So here is an example. Additionally, increased sensitivity to IR post-AZA treatment can be explained by decreased expression. So if you change it to this decreased expression of this factor, can explain or explain. So can explain. Let me put my annotation here. If you want to use the can, that hedges, as we say, it kind of softens the impact of explain, or you could say might explain. If you don't want to say explain, it always with that certainty, but you want to kind of soften the impact, you can use can or might is another option. Might explain, but even if you add might or can, you're still saving 2 words. If you just add explain, you save 3 words, right? If you do this for a few sentences that might be passive and switch them to active, you are in good shape with saving some words. And to look for a passive voice if you have trouble identifying it. I often find that a lot of most folks I work with who grew up in the US or in an predominantly English-speaking country have more trouble identifying passive voice than sometimes folks who had to learn English in school, like I did, right? Because I remember clearly my English teacher for years teaching us on passive voice and the bias. So it's easier when you learn it as a non-native language, as a sort of a foreign language in school or in some sort of school activity, to know the difference between passive and active. But one way to look is to look for the preposition by, right? So by, because usually that's the subject here, and you just switch it around and make the verb active form. Can be explained by, to this decreased, explaining, or can explain something, right? And it's a fail-safe for saving words every single time. Any questions about passive active voice? All right. And again, I'm saying this over and over again, don't worry about using passive voice when you write your first abstract draft. Actually, one thing that some people have done, which I see how that can work, is some folks take certain, like a sentence of each passage that they have in their manuscript, or take a few sentences for each of for the abstract and then combine them. That is not a bad idea. I like to write my abstracts from scratch, but I might use a phrase or something from my text, from the main text, to integrate it there. When you do that, you might have to then combine sentences, because if you use like 4 sentences from your background section for your abstract, you'll have to reduce it. But that's if you're like, oh my God, I don't know where to start with my abstract, choose sort of the key sentences from your manuscript sections and put them together like a puzzle piece, and it'll become this could be your first draft of an abstract. And then you can revise and and rewrite parts and condense it more. But that's not a bad way to start sometimes if you get stumped. And I certainly know a lot of folks who do that. Let's see. Last principle, and then we get to titles in a second. So when I say organized text, there's 2 major ways, I think, especially in abstract, that's a short piece, you can organize your text. And one is to look for what we call parallel structure, and the other one is to look for numerical organizers. Let me give you examples for both. So here, and this is really, sometimes you can save a word, but it's also, it helps in a short abstract to organize the information for a reader. So here, for example, we assess the right methods. We assess the viability of something from 2 different co-registration approaches. One, transformation of, 2, processing. So if we change transformation off to transforming, first of all, we're preserving what is called parallel structure. This needs to look like this. I mean, you also could make process off, but you want to save words, so you probably want to stick with the gerund here, with the ing form. So you make it transforming, pre-process quantitative maps, processing quantitative maps. Okay. So that's, you save 1 word. That might not be a lot, but again, you do this a few times in abstract, you get closer to saving the words you need to save. Okay. So that's parallel structure. When you're listing things, make sure they look the same. Like, for example, the example I always give students is, I like eating cake, baking cookies, and to go for a walk. Like, to go for a walk doesn't match the others. So going for a walk would be the, the way to make it parallel, meaning making it look the same. Like each part, all the things that I like, look the same grammatically in that sense. It's a grammatical principle. It's one of the few grammatical things that I find that are very useful to use when you're revising your work. Clear all drawings. There we go. Let me close this up. And then the example for numerical, that's right. This is numerical stuff is in here. Sorry, I just totally missed on that. The other thing, so what I sometimes see, so we assess the reliability of R2 and quantitative system mapping, comparing metrics from different registration approaches, comma, transforming, and processing, right? So I often see that. So let's say that would be the original. They wouldn't have the 2 from different co-registration approaches, comma or colon, transforming, pre-processed quantitative maps, and processing quantitative maps. I'm like, wow, you have a real opportunity here to organize information for your reader, because there's 2 approaches, obviously, right? So we want to put in the term 2, and you can then use numbers 1 and 2. You can take the and out, 1 and 2. This really helps, especially in abstract that's short. If you have a discrete number of things you want to show, like use 2 different approaches, 3 different, number them. This is a good strategy in general for scientific writing, I find. You know, we had the following aims in our study, and you have 3 of them. Well, tell me we have 3 main aims for our study. Like, tell me how many they are if there's a discrete number. Don't let me, you know, it helps because then I know I'm expecting 3 and I'm getting 3. So I have to do less thinking as the reader. Very useful, particularly for abstracts, but, you know, a shorter text that you have to organize very carefully, but for scientific writing in general. All right. So those are my tips for, and, you know, for this. And I have I'm not going to go over this right now. Let me do what we're doing in time because I want to spend some time on titles and give you some chance to ask some questions. I have a slide here. No, I have a handout I'll make available because I did this with some students and postdocs, and one of the postdocs gave me her abstract, and then we revised it together. And I have a revised version of it using those principles that you can take a look at and compare and contrast on your own. It's useful sometimes to look at an example for that. And if you have time, you can take a look at it together. I would have to find it in my files. But any questions about those principles? I'm going to go stop sharing for a second before we go to the next PowerPoint, so I can see you a little bit bigger and better. Any comments, thoughts? Does this make sense to you? Anything else you can think of how to reduce word count for your abstract and shorten it up and structure and write it?
I usually get, as you said, get the phrases from the text, the most important phrases from the text, and put them together and try to reduce the number and see what part is the most important part to add it. So I think somehow we do some of the stuff, but not all of it, not all the principles.
Oh yeah, and I think that's the piece about, I think, writing and writing workshops. It's like, for me, you know, I still go to like workshops on academic writing when they're offered and I have the chance, because I always learn something, or I'm reminded of something I might have forgotten. Like, oh yeah, right? Because and you know, and you don't have to do all of these 5 principles. If you use 1 or 2, as long as you get to your word count, you're good. And you know, for me, I like to focus on sentence length and nominalization. And through that, I get to active verbs and some other pieces as well. But so you'll find what works best for you based on your writing style and your approach. But but it's good to have sort of a systematic approach rather than like, I kind of do this and sometimes it works and then it gets frustrating because it doesn't work or whatever. Then you can go to something else like, oh, let me look at, do I have a lot of passive voice in here? Right? Like, oops, look at that. There's 3 words saved. But I think the strategy, I agree with you, using pieces from your article, putting them together in the abstract is useful, which reminds me of one of the most important things I forgot to say early on is, which you probably naturally do, don't write your abstract until you've written your manuscript. Unless you find it useful to help you write the manuscript because it gives you a way to organize it, then by all means, do what works for you. But in general, it is writing the abstract before you've written your manuscript is sort of pointless because you need to, or it can create extra work unless that's your process. But for many writers, that might be wasted time early on that they could use and work on their manuscript. And it's easier for a lot of folks to then, you know, use the manuscript and condense it into an abstract, right? Just like I'm a big fan, I don't know, Henry might have mentioned this, writing the introduction section after you've written methods, results, and discussion. Or if you've written something for your intro, because again, it helps you to think about the background and setting that out, know that you will have to go back and revise so that your introduction section, you know, corresponds to your discussion sections. Because what I sometimes see in manuscripts is like an introduction section that's really interesting, you know, and then read methods, results, I get to the discussion section. I'm like, they're suddenly discussing something in the discussion section that is not even related to anything that's in the intro. or it's not well connected. So you got to make sure that you set your readers up with the intro section to be prepared for what's going to come in the discussion section, when you then analyze your results and compare and contrast to previous studies and some of the major concepts. Doesn't mean you can't cite new material in the discussion section. You totally can. You can absolutely cite studies in the discussion section for your comparing, contrasting of results that you didn't cite in the intro. But it's good to go back and make sure if you've written an introduction draft, to kind of make sure they match, right? And they don't go on different tangents. That can often happen. You start writing an intro and then you do actually, and you get to the research and the results and you're realizing you're going in a different direction. Anything else about abstracts? All right, so let's take a look at titles. And full disclosure, title writing is something I find challenging because you have to be very condensed. So, but there also is a formula to it. Anybody want to share a little bit about how do you go about writing your titles?
Before this course, I used to think that on writing the title, it should be as long as it can be.
Very good.
As it can be. We can write all the objectives, the aims.
Oh my God. No. Good. You know what? My lesson's done. That's it. That's pretty much the gist of like, yes, titles should be as short as possible, while also being informative. So that's the tricky part, right? You're like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And so I find with titles, and I got an email the other day from a professor in the School of Medicine who was asking me about, here's my abstract, this is my title, what do you think? Am I getting it? I'm like, it's hard for me. Based on abstract, I can probably get an idea, but he gave me like 3 titles he was working with, like, which one do you think is the best? And I'm like, I said, well, what journal are you writing for? And so I had a lot of more questions for him. So we communicated a few times back and forth. And I said, honestly, like any of these would work, but, I haven't read your study. So are you doing this? Are you doing this? And he's like, oh, I'm doing this. So I think this will work better, right? So it's a process. Some people are just naturally great at writing titles. I'm not that person, but I know people who really that they love doing it and they're really effective at it because they think in a particular way, very strategically. I'm a strategic thinker on some levels, but when it comes to for strategic, for big picture stuff, that's where my strengths lie. I can be detail oriented, but I find it difficult to translate those skills into effective title writing. So this is always something that I run by people, right? And I think the most important thing is, if you have a study you're working on, and you can explain your study in a few sentences what it does, and then give somebody who is maybe not familiar with it, like, does this title express it to you? Is always a great conversation. So titles are a good thing to run by others. But let's anything else about titles? So not very long. I think many journals give you, gosh, I think the recommendation, I don't know the exact number, we'll see it in a second, but something like, 15 words, that's about it. Shorter than that, better, more than that, And when you get to 20, you're really kind of pushing it. But, we'll see the exact numbers in a second. That's what I recall. I haven't looked at this presentation in a while, and I didn't memorize the numbers. But any other thoughts on titles? So yeah, you can't put all of your objectives and aims in the title. It's impossible. That's what the abstract is for in the paper. Go ahead.
Is it okay to have the title in the form of a question?
To put a title in a question format?
Yes.
I wouldn't recommend that.
No.
It's one of these things because you kind of, I wouldn't do that. I'll tell you why. This is also my personal bias towards sort of these rhetorical questions. I'm like, part of me is like, well, I hope you answered your question. Like, give me a statement, like, blah, blah, rather than a question. If you do in a question format, you're taking a little bit of a risk. Using question format to get your reader's attention can be a useful rhetorical device, right? And we use it all the time. Journalists use it all the time. But for scientific writing, we're very fact and information driven. And the question format can throw people off. So I'd be cautious with that. I also be cautious with play on words. In my field, a lot of folks in humanities and social science humanities overlap, like sociologists. like to use a lot of like really funny titles with cultural references, I'd be very careful with that as well, because that can, you know, we'll see some examples that can really backfire and can be actually very inappropriate at times. So really focusing and going for a factual short description of that will give, again, because the title really the most read piece of your article will be the title, because a lot of people will see the title and it might not be something they're interested in a search that they came up with. And the title will entice folks to go to the abstract, and the abstract into the full paper. And that's really ultimately what you want, right? So anything else about titles before we go through the slides? So question format, I'd be careful with that. That's sort of my suggestion for you. All right, titles. So elements of an effective title, common length between 10 to 15 words, can vary by discipline, but this should not be unfamiliar to you. So sometimes you can get away with 17, 18, maybe 20, but you know, it can get just very convoluted. Some titles can have two parts when appropriate, like with a semicolon. So let me see if I can think of an example. Of course, I can't now. Should have pulled some up, but ovarian cancer in systematic reviews do this a lot. Ovarian cancer in women between the ages of 30 to 50. Semicolon, a narrative review or a systematic review. So you can have that. So that's what we call a two-part title. We have a semicolon, and often what comes after the semicolon provides an additional level of explanation. You can do that. People in my field do it all the time. I don't think there's any article published in history or cultural studies journal that doesn't have a semicolon in there. It can make the title a little bit longer, right? But for some, if you're writing a systematic review, that's pretty standard to put colon, a systematic review, or a meta-analysis or something like that.
Or a qualitative study.
A qualitative study, yeah. So you could, a qualitative study of something, and you have something at the beginning. But we'll see some examples of that in a second, yeah. Or you can, because ideally you want to give your reader some idea of what your study is about. Like, let me see, hold on. Let me show you that article we had earlier. I have a couple of articles up. Let's look at these. Was it this one here? Where's the multi-center study? That's actually a good title. It's short, but I think it's I think it was this one here. So here, impact of delay processing of positive : a prospective multi-center study. So this, let's count this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. If you say multi-center, so 15 words, great. So often what comes after the colon is a description of the methodology, or in the case of systematic review, the methodology as well as the genre, right? So when I read this, okay, I know it's a prospective multi-center study, so I already have an idea. Oh, this might be interesting because I'm also looking to do a multi-center study or prospective design, whatever, right? So this would be a good article for me to read if I'm working within something on blood cultures and infectious diseases. So that's a good example of a two-part title. The other titles we have here, those are just some. So here, neighborhood level mass incarceration and future preterm birth risk among African American women. There is no indication of the methodology. This is published in the Journal of Urban Health, so you would have to go to the abstract to get a better idea of that, which is not unusual. You don't always have to include that, but you could. Ganglioside is a novel cancer drug target, also just very focused on the content. And then we have another one here. It's the older piece. Identification suppressor of the innate immune response in ovarian cancer. So this is a good example actually of a title, because we know it's about GD3, which is, I guess, a gene something, right? As a suppressor of the innate immune response in ovarian cancer. So we know it's about something suppressed. We know what it does. It's suppressing the innate immune response in ovarian cancer. So so you get a good idea of what the article focuses on. And like, oh, I want to find out more about this. This sounds interesting. What did they actually do? That's when the abstract comes in, and then, of course, the entire article. So just to give you these here that I had up here to look at some abstracts as well as titles. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. There we go. Here we were. Display settings. Hang on. Here we go. So the two parts when appropriate. summarize the main idea of the paper. And see how I said main idea, not main objectives, right? Main idea. So it's, oh, sorry, I haven't shared my screen, so you didn't see all that, did you? Sorry about that. Here. I thought I was sharing my screen and I didn't. Here is the impact of delayed processing of positive blood cultures. You see right here, the prospective multi-center study, right? You have the colon here, that's the two-part title I was referring to. Let me go through this again since I bundled this up. Clear my drawings. Then you have here, there's no indication of the methodology, which again is fine, or of it's just the neighborhood level mass incarceration and future preterm birth risk among African American women. We know if you do studies based on population, you do want to give some idea what the population is. So we have something about African American women and some sort of connection between mass incarceration and future preterm birth risk. And so, and this is happening on sort of a neighborhood level. I don't know what neighborhood is in, so I'll get more information of that if I would go to the abstract, right? And the abstract is right here. So it gives me a little bit more idea of where this was done. You know, we use a regression test and so on. So I get more details, and then I can, you know, of course, if I wanted to go into the article, if I want to find out more because it's a relevant study to me. See clear drawings. The other two titles I mentioned is this one here, ganglioside synthase, a novel cancer drug target. So this is notice it's a review, right? So it's a much broader title. This is a review. So this is giving us a review about GD3, a novel cancer drug target, right? So I was working with some students from who do cancer work. That's why I had these articles up. And so review titles for reviews then compared to empirical study are going to be very different because in the review article you can be much broader. And then back to another empirical study, molecular. So we have here, it's about, we know the major issue is ovarian cancer. It's about, you know, GD3 that suppresses, so already know something what's happening. You know, what they're looking for, suppressor of the innate immune response, right? So those are all the main elements of the study condensed into a title. That's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 words long. So 15 seems to be a favorite number. I think this other one, give me a second. This one here, the one we looked at initially, also was 15 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe 16, 15 to 16 words, right? So that's again a good length. All right, let me go back to here. Let me see, I'm still sharing, very good. So elements, effective titles, and I'll show you some examples gone wrong in a second. Title should summarize the main idea of the paper. Should capture the main elements of the study. And again, the one element you might not always be able to include is your methodological framework or design, and that's okay. Because that's, you know, if you have the room to do that, like a prospective multi-center study, it's very informative for your readers. But sometimes you have a complex study where the other pieces just outweigh that. Some journals ask you to include that, so it's always, it can also be journal specific. I've seen some guidelines for authors that clearly give guidance on, like, the title should include, you know, mentioning the sort of, you know, the framework of, you know, the type of methodological approach taken in the study. So again, it can vary journal by journal. Avoid abbreviations in your abstract. And of course, if you go back to here, we go back to this one. You know, GD3, I'm assuming, you know, not being in the field, might be a common, you know, readers of this journal might know what it is, but they GD3 synthase, GD3S, they provide the abbreviation for it in the title. Again, it's a review, so things go a little differently. Personally, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this in a title, but that's a personal preference. I like to provide the acronyms in the full text then again, rather than the title, because I think it takes away space. But again, it's a review article. But here, I think this is the first one here. So GD3 here, right, is not, there's no explanation of what that means because it's an abbreviation that is commonly used. So when I say abbreviation, like you don't want to use something like, I'm trying to think of, like, oh, what's a good example? Let's say you're using an abbreviation for immunocompressed individuals, that ICI throughout your text. Don't use that acronym in your title. Write out immunocompromised individuals if that's something you're doing. So be cautious with abbreviations is basically what I'm trying to say. In titles, and you have to always ask yourself, will your audience know what the if you use an abbreviation or an acronym of some sort, acronym meaning like NIH for the National Institutes of Health, if you're using those in your title, you need to really ensure that your audiences will know what they mean, right? So you have to think about who's the main audience for the journal you're submitting to. Catchiness is what and I give some examples. It's like, sort of like a catchy title, like a reference to a common, like a TV series or something, some common cultural phenomena. I'm always cautious with these. It can be cool, right? A catchy title is great. But I often find it's really about information and clear, direct communication rather than trying to be sort of funny in your title to get your reader's attention, because it can backfire really easy. So, for example, here's an example of a title: Carbon Monoxide, to boldly go where NO, N-O, which is of course the carbon monoxide, right? I remember this from chemistry, has gone before. It's a fun title. But if you don't know the US series Star Trek, right? Is it Star Trek? Because it's like, as Enterprise, to boldly go where no one has before. That's kind of a catchphrase from that show. If you don't know that, if you have potentially audience members who are not Star Trek experts or don't like it or have never watched it, people are like, what does this mean? Like boldly go before. So you're taking a risk, and I would be cautious with that risk. So this is an example of using a phrase that might sound funny, like especially with the no, the play with words. That may be a fun title for a book about, about popular science, but not for a research article. So I think it can backfire more than helps. And of course, here's an example that is really kind of poor in taste. Ashes to ashes. Thermal contact burns in children caused by recreational fires. And ashes to ashes is a phrase in the Christian burial service in English. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That's what priests in most Catholic, I grew up Catholic, so again in Germany, but this is, we say the equivalent in German, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It's a saying that the priest says when the body is buried into the ground. So part of me is like, this is about children with contact burns. Like, I don't think this is a really appropriate way. I mean, if the title would start here without ashes to ashes, okay, thermal contact burns in children caused by recreational fires. All right, I get an idea what the study is about. This ashes to ashes is unnecessary. It's sort of catchy, right? It's a catchphrase that, again, most audience members from a sort of Christian English-speaking background would know what it means. But again, if you want your article to be more broadly read by folks who are not familiar with it, that's a barrier. And then I think there's a certain tastelessness here in citing a funeral ritual when you're writing about children with burns. I mean, come on. So again, this is an extreme example, but I hope you get the point I'm trying to make. Let me clear the annotations. And then I have one more thing on here. Let me get to this. And this is important. And I think this is where your strategy of using phrases from your paper to start drafting your abstract is useful. Make sure you use the same keywords. Like yesterday, what did we look at this about the social work paper? I forgot what the key term in there was, traumatic experiences. So if your paper is about traumatic experiences and you write about them over and over in your paper, traumatic experiences might be a good term to use in your title, right? So use the keywords in the title that you repeatedly use in the abstract and throughout the paper. right? Because you want to make sure that that resonates, what the title resonates with the abstract and resonates with the article. So really thinking about your key terms for your work can help you construct the title as well. This is from a really fun little blog post on slate.com on there's a lot of titles on there that are really very inappropriate. Some are very funny and or inappropriate, but and again, they're written from a sort of US North American kind of perspective, but you might find some of them interesting. So check out the blog. So here is an example from the APA manual. Go ahead. Yes.
I should have said this before, but if you wrap up in about 10 minutes because
10 minutes? Absolutely. I was about wondering if you want to stop at like 2:30. Yes, I'll be done here in a sec. So just some
people need to travel back to their hometowns.
It's your last day. I forgot about this. So so here is just to show you from the American Psychological Association. So I'm not using, that's what APA stands for. So you see some effective versus ineffective titles. So the first one, effect of depression on the decision to join a clinical trial. The ineffective title is a study of the effect of depression on the decision to join a clinical trial. So a study of right? We can take that out because that saves us words. We know it's a study. So it's really, what's the study about? This is this part. So, right, we can take that out. The effective title, why and when hierarchy impacts team effectiveness, a meta-analytic integration. So you see here, right, the information about how the study was conducted, rather than hierarchy and team effectiveness. Because I'm like, okay, it's like ovarian cancer and GD3. What's the point? Like, what's the connection, right? We need to know a little bit more than just the keywords. So when you use keywords, you need to make sure you connect them with each other. It's more precise. And then this one here, closing your eyes to follow your heart, avoiding information to protect a strong intuitive preference, rather than using this catchphrase only, right? Closing your eyes to follow your heart. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? So that's a good example of a two-part title with a catchphrase that maybe is a little bit more. Yes. Go ahead. Sorry, Henry, did somebody say something?
No, it's okay.
Okay. So give me a second. Let me look through my slides briefly and see where I can wrap up. So there's some more examples of titles. I want to walk you through this here, and then you can actually do it yourself. But this is an approach that I really liked. I found this on a scientist's on Editage. Editage is another company, like a revision editing company, working with scientists in particular, but with academic writers in general. But they have this 5 simple steps to write a good research paper title. And it's really about, ask yourself these questions and make note of the answers. What is my paper about? What techniques were used? Who is studies? What were the results? So what's the big result? And include information about, population, or in this case, cities in Japan, what techniques or basic method, and what's the paper about, right? And you could use this, and he takes you through. I'm just going to here's the list of keywords that he came up with. So you have the step 1, answer these questions. Step 2, list your keywords, right? And they come directly from your article. Create a long sentence. So if you're like, oh, I don't know where to start off with the long sentence that you kind of describe all these things, right? Current length, 28 words. Step 4 is delete the unnecessary repetitive words, link the remaining. And you come up with a title of either 13 or 12, depending on if you use a subtitle, or randomized trial of X therapy for improving cognitive function in 40 dementia patients, or X therapy improve a randomized trial. So those are the 2 options. But this is a really great approach to use. Write the keywords down, ask yourself those questions, write the keywords down, write a long sentence, and then start reducing the sentence to the main information of the title. I have used this method a lot, and I find it very useful because it focuses you on the most important parts for for that. So I rushed through this a little bit, but it's pretty straightforward approach. The link to the article is here on the bottom. So I'll send the stuff to Henry right after I'm finished from yesterday and today. So Henry, if you can forward to everyone, that'd be great. And if you have any questions, I included my email address on one of the PowerPoint slides at the beginning. And I'm happy to answer any more questions as you're working on your manuscript. Feel free to contact me. I'm happy to take a look at whatever you want me to take a look at. Bear in mind, I'm not an expert in your fields, but I certainly can take a look at it from sort of readability, flow, and can give you a set of eyes if you want some on your work.
Right, yes, so
Thank you so much.
obviously you'll be looking at structure and not context,
Yes.
for sure.
So I can't tell you like, oh, you should do this method or that method, or I think your statistical analysis needs different term. I'm like, sure. So and that's not my expertise, obviously, but I can tell you if I'm like, okay, this paragraph and this paragraph, I don't see how they connect. What's going on? So I tend to ask a lot of questions in my feedback. You might like or not like that, but
That's okay.
like, what does this mean? And I might make some suggestions depending on how I understand what you're writing. And it can sometimes be helpful. You're like, oh, wow, no, that's not really what I mean. Oops, right? And then you can revise based on that.
So I often send in my papers because I know she's the only one who would read them.
Who's
It's
what?
very difficult to get somebody to read your papers. And so I really lean on Isabelle very much. So someone, if you could get someone to read your papers, you're lucky.
Yes.
So anyway, that was great. Isabelle. I really appreciate it, and it seems like at the moment your family members are doing well on their own.
Yes, I know, no interruption, right? Woohoo! Like, he had this deviated septum surgery, so he has like this pain in his nose, and the nose is, it's actually getting better, but it's just he can't really breathe through his nose. I mean, poor guy. He's getting his stents out on Monday, so I'm hoping next week will be better, but oh my goodness. His nose is like all blue and black. It looks like he's been in a fight, but he hasn't.
Well, I hope he's sleeping in another room. But
Yes, he is. Well, yes, he definitely is.
Anyway, Isabelle, thank you so much.
You're welcome, everyone. Bye. Have safe travels back to your hometowns.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, wait a second, Isabelle.
Yes.
Hold on. There we go. Okay.